Good afternoon or good morning or good evening, depending on where you're joining from today. My name is Iliana Abouassi and I'm from the American Autism Association. We're delighted to have you all here today for the virtual learning or the virtual parenting workshop that we're hosting with Acuity Behavioral Solutions. This is a part of a workshop series that we're hosting in order to help families, caregivers, and individuals who've been impacted by autism spectrum disorder to help them while everyone's at home. For those of you that don't know, the American Autism Association is a nonprofit organization in New York and Miami dedicated to helping families and individuals affected by autism. We do this in three ways. The first is through an autism help hotline, where we assist individuals all around the world with finding resources or information in their area. And we provide those resources in Spanish, English, and French. In addition to that, we have therapeutic recreational programs such as ballet, soccer, horseback riding, which we offer for families. And lastly, we have parenting workshops and education pieces. So we focus on providing information for families. So on our website, we have a ton of different information, as well as hosting these workshop regularly with different partners to help educate as best as possible. So today we're really looking forward to talking with you about how to help your child cope with change. But before we begin, we just want to make sure that your settings are all set so that you can get the best engagement today. So please make sure you have it on speaker view. Our speaker today is going to be sharing their screen with some helpful information for you, and that will be the best way to view it. We also ask that you keep yourself on mute. We know sometimes it's easy to accidentally unmute yourself, but we just want to make sure everyone can hear our speaker as best as possible. Lastly, we're going to be recording the session. So, if you have to hop off or have work or something, don't worry, we'll be sending you everything afterwards. And also at the end of the presentation, we'll be doing a Q&A. So we encourage you throughout to ask questions, but what we'll do is we'll be asking all those at the end of the presentation. So now I'd like to pass things over to Lindsey, who's joining us from Acuity Behavior Solutions, and she's the executive director and founder, who's going to be doing our presentation today.
Thank you. So my name is Lindsey Nguyen. I'm the executive director and founder at Acuity Behavior Solutions. We are a company that provides ABA, Applied Behavior Analysis, to children with autism and other related disorders. And we have been doing ABA for many years. I personally have been doing ABA since I was 18, and I'm now definitely well into my 30s, so quite a bit of time. And I've personally worked with lots of children, both on the spectrum of autism and also other children who are not. Children that I've worked with have ranged from 1 year old up through adulthood. And I've experienced a very wide range of behaviors as well. And so I've put this together as a way to help parents with managing change. And it's kind of reads like a list of things that we can do to help kids, whether it's a child with autism or a child who doesn't have autism. Change affects all of us. And so these are some good strategies. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And then we'll go ahead and get started. So here we go. Perfect. So today's topics, we'll be talking about how change affects children, how change affects children with autism specifically, strategies for coping with change, and then we'll go over a Q&A session. So before we get started, I'd like to hear a little bit, if you all have the time to write into the chat. Do most of you have children with autism or work with children with autism? Go ahead and write into the chat if you can, what your experience is and what makes you come to this webinar. So I think what I had heard prior is we have a lot of parents. Good. Okay, we have someone who's working with children. Excellent.
Lindsey, we have some people chiming in on Facebook as well who are saying that they have children on the spectrum.
Okay, great. Yeah, so this should be helpful for anybody who has children with autism or any other disorder, and just anybody with children in general, and then people who are working with children as well. And if you can chime in and let me know what age group and age range your children are in, so that I can kind of hear a little bit about where your children are. The age range that your child is in. We have one who's 7 years old, very cute age. I have a 1-year-old myself, so that's a fun age as well. Okay. So we have one with 7, a couple others probably chiming in on Facebook as well. Great. So let's go ahead and talk about how change affects children. So a lot of us as adults may actually not love change at all times. So change can affect children differently than adults, and then it can be different depending on the child. So personality plays a really large role. Some children are generally pretty mellow about change. They roll with it, it's fine. And other children prefer their routines. They don't want things to change. They like it when it's the same every day. Um, Change can make some children feel unsafe or unsure. And for those kids who don't enjoy change and don't respond well to it, it can cause additional problem behaviors, feelings of sadness, feelings of fear or anxiety. And those problem behaviors may be something they usually have and may be amplified by change. Now, children with autism, if some of us who work with children and some of us who have children with autism may see that a lot of children with autism prefer order and routine and things being the same, and that helps them to cope. So routines can be highly preferred for children with autism. When those changes occur and the routines are not there anymore, they may have a fear reaction, anxiety, maybe mixed emotions, and not know how to manage themselves. And generally speaking, people with autism may have, and some don't, but every person with autism will be different, just like people who don't have autism. Everybody's different. But some children will have difficulty with self-regulation. And that's where you're calming yourself down, knowing that you're not feeling good and doing something to make yourself feel better. People with autism may not recognize those feelings and then may in turn not be able to self-regulate, self-calm, and bring themselves down. So children, just like we said, who don't have autism may also have problems with change and difficulty with that change. So before I go into the individual strategies, the first thing I want to let everybody know about is that we definitely want you to consult with professionals. So I don't know everybody's child specifically, but I'm giving generic advice on kind of what I've seen and things that have worked for many, many kids in my experience. I've worked with hundreds of kids, and so these are some of the really helpful strategies that can really make a difference. But that being said, always consult with a doctor if you feel there's a medical component on anything. Always consult with the professionals that already work with your child to ensure that you're getting everything covered. So the first strategy for coping with change is priming. So priming is kind of the fancy way of saying talking about something in advance to kind of put it into the child's head. So it's warning them in advance that something will happen. For example, if let's say the child is about to have a new way of doing school on Zoom, you would explain that to them. Hey, Johnny, today we're going to be having school in a different way than normal, and it's going to be online on Zoom. And that's a little different than before, but that's okay. We're going to do a great job there too. So explaining it, telling them what to expect, and the more specific the expectations are, and the more specific you are about what will happen, the better, because they're able to know this is what I'll expect, this is what is going to happen. And it makes it just easier for that child to process it and know. Now, priming, telling them about things in advance can be helpful either weeks in advance, a week in advance, 1 day in advance, 1 hour, even a minute. And for some kids, you might tell them about a change a week ahead, a day ahead, an hour ahead, and then 1 minute before it happens. And that's a lot of priming. And then they're really ready. They've been talking about it, they're ready, and they know it's happening. So that's a definite helpful strategy for coping with change. So moving to the next strategy, this can actually help you as a parent and the child. So just talking about feelings, this is really just helpful for you to ask them in the most delicate way possible how they're feeling, letting them just talk about it. That can help them to process how they're feeling and really organize their thoughts. And that can also help you as a parent or a person working with that child with autism or other disabilities. That can help you to understand them better. For example, if a child says, I don't really like this change because I usually watch cartoons at that time, and my favorite cartoon is I'm not going to get to watch it that day. That might be the reason the child is upset, and we can fix that by recording that cartoon. So sometimes the fixes for these difficulties with change are simple and easy, and just talking about it can help us uncover some really good solutions. Our next strategy is to create a new routine. So when we have a change, oftentimes we used to do something in a really specific way. For example, if we used to go to school in the morning and be at the bus stop by 8 a.m., and then all of a sudden we're now doing Zoom instead. That's okay. That's a good change because we need to do that right now. But it may make it feel like it's not what we wanted, or the child may feel like it's not what they wanted. It doesn't include their old routine, and that can be upsetting. And so creating a new routine that's the new normal, and we do that same thing every day, can be really helpful because you're replacing one with the other. It's hard if we jump into a new way of doing things and then we change it every day. It's very stressful. So making a new routine can be super helpful. And one way to make that routine clear is to write it down or to have pictures. For example, you can see in the picture here a little routine for the morning. You might do a picture routine. You can print things out from the internet. You can take pictures of the child doing those tasks and put them in a row. You can, for an older child who maybe can read, you can write them out and make it into a checklist. And just having that visual for the routine, which we'll talk a little bit more later about visuals, but making that routine a new routine can be so helpful because they just get into that new one and it's no longer stressful. All right. So our next strategy for coping with change is maintaining other routines. So if you change everything at one time, that can be very, very stressful. Let's say your child is starting a new school routine and then also changing to a new psychologist or a new counselor that they talk to. Those are two very large changes. This would not be the time in that case to then also start a new diet plan or a new way of doing food. So we want to kind of keep our big changes to maybe one a week or one in a certain time frame. That allows our child to get used to that routine. And then after that routine is set and easier and really clear, we can add those new routines and those new changes in. So kind of just making sure we're not overburdening the child with many, many changes at once. It's the best way to do it is one change, get it kind of going in a nice way, and then to move to a new change. So maintaining all of our other routines is an excellent plan. Our next strategy for coping with change is to give choices. So sometimes children are offered too many choices, and that can actually be stressful. There's a lot of studies out there in the research about how people who have too many choices can actually become unhappy because making the decision is too stressful. So what we do very frequently is we'll give 2 or 3 choices. And that helps the child to have a sense of control because they have options. And that also helps the child to not have too many options to pick from. As an example, if you would like your child to eat breakfast, you maybe normally would say, well, what do you want to eat? That might be too many choices, too open. And so a better way might be to know a few things they like and say, would you like oatmeal or a banana to start with? And that gives them 2 choices. It's really clear. And you're making it clear that it is time to eat. So the parent or the person in charge has that authority to say, okay, these are the options I'm presenting. And that sort of serves as the guardrails, kind of letting the child know these are the current options on the table. And then giving the choice allows the child to have a little sense of control. If you just say, okay, you're going to eat oatmeal and you hand it to them, that is not giving them any choice and may make them feel upset. And so giving a choice can be super helpful. Another example of giving choices, or you might call it forced choices, like here are your options, pick one. Another example of this would be if you have a child who is working on schoolwork. And for example, on that schoolwork, you might say, it is time for us to do our work. Would you like to use the pink notebook or the blue notebook? And now you're saying, we don't have an option about school, but I'll give you a choice within that activity. That gives them some sense of control, and that can be very helpful for children. Okay, and another thing for us to remember for coping with change, another strategy is meeting their physical needs. So a lot of times we do see that children who forget to eat or haven't slept well will have more problem behaviors very commonly because they just aren't feeling well. So it's very, very important to ensure all the physical needs of the child are met. In some cases, children with autism may need what we consider sensory breaks. They feel like they need to move. They might need to run or push something. And you can create an obstacle course. You can create an outdoor playground. You can let them jump into a box, anything that's lying around that would be safe and helpful for them to get out that physical energy. That can be so helpful to help them cope with change, to make sure their body isn't feeling out of control and that they're well fed, they're sleeping, they aren't feeling too much energy. So meeting those physical needs is really, really helpful. And that can be very effective at ensuring that when you present a task they don't feel like doing, you're not doing that right at the same time as they're extremely hungry. I'm sure some of us have experienced feeling a little bit hangry, hungry and angry put together. And that's kind of an example as an adult how you might kind of see your physical needs affecting your emotions. So we want to prevent that and meet all of their physical needs. So another strategy for coping with change is to model positive change language. So children listen to what we say to them. They hear it and they sometimes take that in and it becomes their own feeling. And so when we talk to children about change, if we're talking to them about how we don't want to and we're not excited, those are sometimes going to bleed into the child's way of thinking. So if we're saying, oh, we have to do this new routine, the child may pick up on that and feel more anxious. So a way to combat that or to make sure that's not happening is to model appropriate and positive language. So when I'm telling a child, we get to do something new. So let's say the change that's going to happen today is we're starting a new food. We have a child maybe, for example, who only likes chicken nuggets. And so for that child, we need to change. We need to add some foods in. And so we might say, we get to try a new food today. Isn't that so exciting? And that puts it in that positive light. So modeling that positive change language. Another example might be for school. If your child loves seeing his friends at school, you might say, well, good news. I know we haven't seen them for a little bit, but you can see your friends on Zoom. Isn't that so exciting? And you can see all their faces. So really going and making it clear how this is going to be fun and exciting. And in some cases, it might not be a great change. And you might just want to model language about how we're going to be okay. So let's say the change is, okay, now every week we have to go to the doctor for a month or two. So that's a change for a child that is going to be hard to frame positively. In that case, you might say, well, you know what? We're tough. We're strong. We can do this. We're going to go, and then we're going to go have fun right after. Maybe you say, oh, we're going to go to the doctor on Friday, and then right afterwards, we'll go eat lunch. That'll be so fun. So that positive change language can be so helpful for them to take that in and repeat it themselves. Any questions, feel free to throw them into the chat box as well. We'll be checking that as we go. Okay, so our next strategy, this is a really big one in ABA, or Applied Behavior Analysis, which we do at our company at Acuity Behavior Solutions. We do a lot of reinforcement. Reinforcement is giving or helping provide things that the child likes, things that make the child more likely to do that behavior in the future. So an example of reinforcement is I say, hey, to my child, hi, Johnny, please finish up your chore and then I'll give you your ice cream. So that's an example. The ice cream is a reinforcement, and that is basically the child earning something. They did the right behavior and they earned something. So we really rely on that really heavily in ABA. We love reinforcement. We want it to be a positive, happy experience. We want the child to think to themselves, when I do the right thing, I get good things. I get rewards and reinforcements. And so reinforcement is really helpful. There's really a couple approaches you can really take. You can give a child reinforcement for a pre-specified thing. For example, telling them in advance, I'll be giving you a reinforcement for this. I'll give you a cookie after you do that. Or you can also just randomly, without telling them in advance, reward appropriate behavior. Either way is good, but we do try to be really systematic about it and make sure that we're consistent, especially in ABA therapy. So reinforcement should also be very specific to the child. So sometimes we think that reinforcement, it's something that the child wants, and then it turns out they absolutely don't want that thing. And that does happen. We want to assess, is the reward or the reinforcer that I'm giving this child right now, is that good enough? So for example, I've worked with a child who loves chocolate, absolutely loves chocolate. We said, okay, all you have to do is sit at the table and do your work at the table for 5 minutes, and then we'll give you your piece of chocolate, just a little piece. Well, so this child who would normally love chocolate refused. So what does that mean? That means that that reward wasn't strong enough at that time. We might have needed to do a bigger piece of chocolate or a different reward altogether. Children's preferences for what they want can change by the minute, by the hour. We want to always be knowing, what is this child working for? And as a reinforcer, and what does that reinforcer, is it enough for that child? Is it the thing that they will work for? So that always changes. We're always looking at that. So reinforcement, it's a critical thing. Knowing what the child likes, making sure it's not something that they're bored of. Formally we call it, if they're satiated, it means that they already had too much of it. Like if I just ate 5 pieces of pizza, I'm probably not going to work for an additional piece of pizza, right? So as an example, I don't really know if I could actually eat 5 pieces of pizza. But anyway, that basically you want to make sure you don't satiate the child, give them too much of something so that it then becomes not a reward at all. Okay, so reinforcement, very important principle. So the next thing you can do as a strategy for coping with change, you can make transitions fun. So sometimes a change is a little one. We're changing from activity A to activity B. For example, I'm having my child run from the television to the computer to do school Zoom or online school. Now, that's a transition that the child doesn't necessarily feel like making, because it's going from a fun thing to a thing that might not be quite as fun for them. So to make that transition fun, some options would be potentially racing them to the computer. I'll race you over there. Let's see who wins. And you race over there. Of course, maintaining safety. Another example would be making it into a game where they pretend to be their favorite character. I have worked with a child who was really, really into Star Wars, loves Star Wars. So sometimes if we wanted him to transition, we would have him pretend he was one of those Star Wars characters. And we'd say, okay, well, how would that character do this transition? How would he walk over there? And so just having the child make that transition more fun and interesting can make it less of a chore and less likely to have the child say, no, I don't want to do that. So we want to make transitions fun. As our next strategy for coping with change, we're going to want to teach children coping skills. So coping skills are those things you do to calm yourself, those things you do to make yourself feel better. Oftentimes, coping skills are used after we're feeling upset, after we're starting to escalate. But when we teach coping skills, something that's often missed is that you actually would be better off, and this is really shown with lots of children I've worked with. You want to teach those coping skills before you need them. So when the child is calm, happy, not having any problems, let's say they're playing video games and they're happy, that's a great time to practice a coping skill. Do any of you have coping skills that your children currently use? For example, when they're upset, counting to 10, or when they're upset, putting on headphones to listen to music. Or another example is squeezing a pillow. What kinds of coping strategies are your kids that you work with, or your kids of your own? What are they using for coping strategies? Does anyone have any examples?
You could have, like, for example, taking a time out to have a walk somewhere that is really calming. You know, flowers and nature normally brings that essence of calmness for those persons who appreciate it. You could send a child out there to get to gather back him or herself.
Good. Yeah, I have definitely seen this with many kids. A little walk can be so helpful. I see in the chat box somebody wrote counting to 10, asking for help. These are all great. There's not one right strategy. It's really, you could have a list of them that work for a specific child. You could have one main one. We want to really have a couple different strategies. For older kids, they could be listening to music for a minute. They can request a break to listen to music. Some children I've actually worked with who like to have a squeeze toy. Has anybody seen a stress ball, where you can kind of squeeze a stress ball? Other children I've seen, they have a really tiny, like kind of a figurine. Good. So a couple people responding that, yeah, they have seen kids use a stress ball. Good. So a littler thing that is a little less easily seen by others could be a small squishy figurine. So these things can help kids to cope. And, you know, sometimes people say, well, we don't want them to be dependent on that thing, but it really is okay to have a coping strategy like that. Many of us adults, we still have coping strategies like that, and so that's perfectly okay to allow kids to have things that other people can see, like a stress ball, those kinds of coping strategies. Other things that you can do, we have a question here about what could be done at school. Typically at school, you're going to want those coping mechanisms to be something that's less disruptive, doesn't require getting up and leaving. So for some kids, they might squeeze their knees because it gives them a little sensory input. For some children, they might just stand up to stretch really quick because it helps their body to kind of get going again. So really you have to try a variety of different things and see what works for that child. You want to teach them when they're calm. We don't want to be trying out a whole group of new strategies when they're already upset. We want to try them out, test them out, and teach them when they're currently calm and happy, and then reward it. You know, oh, wow, you did a great job practicing that. Here's your reinforcement for practicing. Awesome. And then once they actually do later become escalated, we'll have them take that skill that they learned and practiced when they were calm, for example, squeezing a ball, and we'll have them do that. It's easier to do something that you've done a bunch of times when you're upset. If you're upset and someone's trying to teach you something new, you don't want to listen as an adult or a child. So the best time to teach these skills is when they're calm and happy, and we want to reward them for practicing them. Another thing you can do with coping skills is have a sibling, a friend, another family member show them so that they don't feel like it's different. And also it's a good model. We want to show them how to do it. Good. Okay, so coping skills. We always want to teach coping skills. Even if there isn't a change coming up, coping skills are definitely an excellent thing to have. So the next thing that we could use as a strategy for coping with change is visuals. So visuals are things that show the child what to do. A lot of times in our current society, we're telling people, we're saying, this is what you should do, and we're giving verbal directions. We're telling. We're always giving commands, explaining things verbally. And that's okay. That works for lots and lots of people. But some people in the population, whether they have autism or not, they just learn better from visuals. When you have a visual, they just remember that information more easily and readily. So for a lot of children with autism, there is research showing that they learn better visually than from hearing commands and hearing teaching. So we in ABA, we'll use a lot of what's called visual supports. So these are ways of teaching the child. You can do it in a lot of different ways. For example, if you want a child to ask for help, you can have a picture of the word help in a word bubble. You could also have a totally different type of visual if you're trying to teach a child a new toileting routine to go to the restroom. You could have a step-by-step procedure with a picture for every step. That's a little picture schedule. And that'll show them, this is the first step, this is the second step, and the third. Have any of you used visual schedules or visuals with children that you work with, or your own children who have autism? Any of you used visuals before?
We have a particular student where we're at the moment, and in order for him to get throughout the day, it is most important that you provide a tangible timetable for him to let him see exactly how the day proceeds.
Good. Okay,
The only problem I
perfect.
have with that though is that whenever there's an interruption beyond our control, I had a task managing that when it differed, and to explain it to him now and said, okay, we had this here, but it has been changed. It's like, no, every Monday it's this, every Monday it's this. How do I approach that?
Okay, yeah, so we'll definitely take more specific questions towards the end, but definitely with visuals, like you said, they do help. We want the visuals to be generic enough so that they apply to the same situation every day, and then we want to practice with them repeatedly. And no skill is going to be perfect right off the bat with any of these strategies. Usually it'll take time, so we'll always be practicing, and then eventually after several sessions, several times of trying things, that's when we see an improvement. Good. Okay. And then our next strategy is called the PREMAC principle, or first then. Everybody in the chat box, if you can write whether you have used first then. So just type into the chat box if you have used the strategy first then. So for example, first do your work, then you'll earn a snack. First do your work, then we'll earn a video game time. Good. So I see definitely a couple yeses. Excellent. So this is a really good strategy for children with autism. Good. And it really does work very well, especially when you're having a hard time as a parent, kind of feeling a little more in control. As a parent, you want to be the one in charge. And so first then statements can help you to regain that I'm the adult, I'm in charge, I'll give you what you want, but first you need to do something else. So first then is the PREMAC principle, that's the official term for it. And it's basically having them do the thing they don't want to do first. For example, first do a homework sheet, and then the next thing is the thing that they do want to do, the reinforcer. So first do your homework, then go play outside. That is an excellent and very easy way to get the child to engage. Now, some troubleshooting for you guys. Often I see people using first then in really big chunks. So for example, you don't want to do this where you say, okay, first go to school all day, and then I'll give you a break outside. You want to make sure that those are smaller tasks. So for example, first do 1 hour of work, and then I'll give you a 10-minute break. The smaller, the better, so that they're getting more frequent rewards, which we call reinforcement. So we really do want to make them shorter. And then always make sure that you have them you don't give the reward first. You don't say, okay, I'll give you a candy and then you can go. You want to make the reward the second part. So first do your worksheet, and then you may have your time outside. So that's first then. Perfect. Okay, so our next strategy for coping with change, timers. So I can attest personally, I like to know my schedule. I like just myself. I like to know how long things are going to take. I need to know. It helps me to plan my day. And a lot of people with autism and other people as well are like that. They want to know exactly how long something's going to take. And not knowing when an activity will end can actually be very stressful for a lot of people. And so timers will help us to show the child, this is how much time you have left with this activity. Now, some kids can read a clock and you can say, hey, at 2:00 p.m., we're done. And that's easy for those children. However, some children don't know how to read the clocks, don't know about time, and they might need something more simple and easy. And even if they do know how to tell time, this can still be a good strategy because it's so visual for them. Putting a timer up to show them this is how long you have with this activity. It makes it very tangible for them so that they know that this activity isn't going to go on forever. Perfect. And I see a couple of chat box here, a couple comments saying that they've used timers before. Perfect. Yeah, and some kids it may actually be distracting. If you find that it's distracting, you can either stop using it or try a different type of timer. So there are a lot of different ones. If you look on, for example, online, there are sand timers, which are very simple. There are the oil-based ones that look like water and oil. There are clocks that actually you can turn, and there's a little red part that tells you how much is left. So there's a lot of different ways you can do a timer. And then you can also just set a timer to beep. There's lots of apps on your phone that can also be used. Some children love seeing the little countdown on some of the timers. And for other children, the countdown is way too distracting. So good. Great. And keep throwing your questions into the chat box. So the next strategy, this is going to only be with children who understand calendars, days of the week. If a child is not there yet, you're not going to want to use this strategy. So helping a child cope with change, a calendar can help them to know what's coming up. I have had a child who really didn't like that I've worked with, that the child did not like that Saturday and Sunday had no school. He wanted school every day. And so we made him a calendar and we said on Monday we have school, Tuesday we have school, Wednesday we have school, Thursday and Friday. And then Saturday and Sunday we had the calendar as a different color. And he could see, okay, these are my no school days. I only have 2 of them. And then Monday I'll go back. And we had him check off every morning at the same time Okay, today is Thursday, I'm going to school. Okay, today is Friday, I'm going to school. Okay, today is Saturday, I have no school today. And we would talk about it using the calendar. So a calendar can be really helpful for a child who understands it. You can also throw other things into there. For example, if you have a doctor's appointment coming up, you might write that into the calendar and explain it. And then your child will know this is coming up. All right, perfect. And another one that's similar is to-do lists. I know for myself, I rely so heavily on my calendar and my to-do list. I love my to-do list, and it helps me to manage myself. And a lot of children with autism and other children really love to-do lists, especially because they show you this is what we're doing. And once we're done with all these check boxes here, we're done. We can go do something else. So the to-do list can be very, very helpful because you're seeing, the child is seeing, this is all that has to be done. It's not this endless list of things. So you can see in the example here, there are morning routines and they look like little checklists. You could also make a checklist of things, for example, for schoolwork. Let's say today, by the end of the day, what's due for your child's schoolwork is 4 worksheets and 1 page of reading. So we might write all those onto our checklist and have the child check them off. And then when it's all checked off, we're done. We can go outside. Great. Or we're done. We can go play inside. So that checklist gives them a really good idea of exactly what has to be done, and they don't feel like, oh, my mother or the person working with me, they're just going to keep giving me tasks with no end in sight. It really helps to help with that change, especially if today's to-do list is different than yesterday's. It helps them to see, okay, I know this is different, but this is what we're doing. All right, just go ahead and write into the chat box. Has anybody used to-do lists or checklists for your child? Just write yes or no into the chat box. Okay, looks like a couple of us probably have done so. Good. All right, so our next system, oh, there we go. A couple of people saying yes to the checklist. Very helpful. One more thing, going back to the checklist as well, you also want to make sure it's not too overwhelming, and you could turn it into picture checklists if that is more helpful. And one additional note on checklists, sometimes children enjoy checking them off or crossing them out, and that's great to let them. In other cases, the child finds checking them off or crossing them out to be a lot of work and they don't like it. And in that case, you might check it off for them because you don't want to have them do a good thing and then make them do something they don't like as a reward. So in some cases, I'll advise on a checklist that the child checks it off. In other cases, I'll advise that the parent or the therapist working with the child is the one that does the checking off of the checklist. Okay, now our next strategy is point systems. Point systems is a really flexible thing. You can change it around. In ABA, we do a lot of this. We create individualized point systems that are very, very helpful for those children who need to know what they're working for. It's a visual way to show them what they're earning. So the key components of a point system, and this isn't written on the slide, but the 3 key components of any point system are: 1, that they know what the reward is; 2, that they have a specific thing that they're doing to earn that reward; and 3, that they know the amount of points to earn. So as an example, hey, little Johnny, we're earning ice cream. Okay, that's the thing we're working for. To earn it, we have to pay attention to our task at the table for 1 minute for each point. And then we're going to earn 10 points, and then you'll get your ice cream. So now I've made it clear. Here's what you're earning. Here's how to earn it. And there's the number of points you're going to need. So then we go ahead and we write those points in. And when he earns his 10 points, we immediately give him that reward. Okay, so that's one example. Point systems can be longer term or shorter term. So everybody go ahead, if you have the ability, to write into the chat box, have you used a point system or a ticket system with a child with autism or with the children that you work with? If you have used a point system, you can write that in. That might be you've given them tickets to earn something, points on a chalkboard, even just putting up 5 fingers and saying, okay, we're going to do 5 tasks, and then you can earn your reward. Okay, looks like definitely we have seen, we have a lot of children who are on point systems. Point systems also need to be flexible. We may see that a point system isn't working. If it's not working, we need to change it. We might need a better reward. We might need lower levels of points required to get that reward, or we might need to change to an easier thing that they're doing to earn it. I'll give you an example of something that was too difficult. So I was working with a child with autism, and we had a point system in place. And for his point system, he had to go. Basically, this one is what we would officially call a DRO. So this this child was having to go 1 hour with no kicking of his brother in order to earn a point. And then at the end of the day, if he had enough points, he would earn a reward. Now, we found that he was kicking his brother very frequently prior to that. And it was working, but we felt that the hour might have been too aggressive. And so we made it a smaller period of time, and he saw more success. And as he earned his reinforcement, he stopped kicking more and more because it was more tangible, more easy to earn. So we don't want a point system to be too hard for the child to earn so that they give up. We want to make it just out of reach or just right at their level. So another example of a point system for those of us with children who are online could be you have a child who wants to get up out of their chair during school and go and get water every 5 minutes. Well, maybe we make a point system for that child. If you stay in your chair with this timer for 5 minutes, I'll give you a point. After you get 10 points, I'll let you go outside and swing on the swings, or I'll let you play indoors. Okay? So those are point systems. For older kids, you might want to use markers and dry erase boards, or for younger kids, you might use actual tokens, which are, maybe a character that they get a point. It looks like a little picture of their favorite character. When they're older, that might not be the thing you want to do because it may not be as reinforcing. They might not like that. For the kids who are even older, there are some apps. There are some free apps where you can actually do the points on the app, and it will tell you when you earn the reward. So definitely look those up as well. Excellent. So additional strategies for coping with change. Of course, if you feel that you need a more targeted and specific behavior plan, speak with an ABA team. If you already have an ABA team, you can speak with them about wanting to make a more specific plan. And then if you don't have an ABA team and your child qualifies, you may be able to start ABA services. And we do a lot of individualized assistance where we create specific things like this for every child. And then an additional thing that we could also have our children do is, if we feel like it's necessary, and maybe if a doctor says it's necessary, talk to a counselor. In some cases, learning to cope with change can have to do with anxiety and things like that. And that's where you want to involve a therapist to talk to. So those are professionals you can reach out to help further. So it's been great talking with everybody. I'd like to open it up. If you have questions, just write them into the chat box, and then we'll get to them as soon as we are able to.
Yeah, Lindsay, we've had a question come in. I am going to, do you want to stop sharing your screen? And then
yes.
A little more visual. So the first question kind of goes back to you're talking about rewards and reinforcement, and regarding food, because some parents have been told to not use food as a reinforcement and to find alternatives, so as not to encourage using, chocolate or fast food as a reward, although we all probably know that kids really love that. What's an alternative, or what are your thoughts on that?
That's actually a really good question. So we typically in ABA, there's a lot of varying opinion on that. Some agencies that do ABA tend to use food all the time. Some don't use it at all. My professional opinion, based on what I've read in the research, is that you want to only use food as a reinforcer if pretty much nothing else works. So if you have a problem behavior like a child running into the street and you want to make sure that behavior is going away, maybe they're doing that because they're upset about a change occurring. If you're using a reinforcer that just isn't working, for example, you're trying to use video games and that's not working, you may end up needing to use what we call a primary reinforcer, like a food reinforcer, because of the severity of that behavior, to bring that behavior down, and then transition later to something that's non-food. My opinion as well is that no food should be withheld for a child. So if you are using a food reinforcer, it should be more of a snack or a dessert rather than a meal. We don't ever want to use meals and say, okay, you can't eat until you do your work. That makes for some problems with the child's eating in the future. So my advice is, if you are going to use food reinforcers, it should be only if you absolutely need to, and it should only be desserts, snacks, non-foods, more like things that are in addition to the regular food that they would eat. Is there any additional questions on that?
Nope, but I do have another question.
Okay.
The question relates a little bit more to a lot of the changes that we've discussed about are external changes, school, schedule, tasks. What about internal ones? We had a question come in specifically about a child in middle school and relating to puberty and the changes that happen there, and how to help cope with them, because they are internal. So, perhaps a point system might not be what would work best in that. Do you have any recommendations for parents with preteens or teens?
Yeah, I would say a really good way to explain puberty changes and things like that, things that are internal, would be a strategy called social stories or social narratives. This is a strategy where you basically create a story with the child as the main character, and you kind of explain this is what's happening. Alternatively, you could just go over the information and then talk with them about those things. So a lot of free resources on puberty and teen topics are available online, explaining, there's websites like Kids Health where they explain what's happening to the child's body. And I would say a problem with some of those free resources is it might not be broken down as simply as it could be. So I would say, as a parent, to pre-read that and see if the language is appropriate for the child. That's kind of a form of priming, where you're saying, okay, well, some things are going to come up in your life. You might feel changes in your body. You might feel different. You might even feel moody or get a little acne on your face. These are things that happen to all of us. So explaining it and also normalizing it. I think for some children, when they feel bad about a change, my experience with kids is that when they hear that almost everybody else already went through this, they feel a little less stressed about it, because they're hearing, you know what, this is normal, and I'm a normal person for feeling this. And normal is not really the word we typically use. We would say, this happens to everyone. So we want kids to know that these are the things that'll happen, so they're prepared mentally. And then we also want those children to understand that this happens to lots of people. And it's good too, as a parent, to explain, I sometimes feel stressed out with change, and this is how I deal with it. And it's okay to feel stress. You just have to manage it. So those are all good things to explain. Anything further on that? Any other questions along with that one?
Not that I saw come in.
Okay.
We've had any other questions come in. If anyone does, please put them in the chat now. I guess in the meantime, one of the things at the American Autism Association that we do is we work a lot with parents directly. A lot of the support we're providing is for them. It's conversations similar to the ones that we're having today. And, there's a lot of changes happening for all of us right now, especially, navigating this new kind of school year, whether they be at home or in school or part-time, the back and forth. Do you have any tips for parents for keeping a level head during all the changes that are occurring right now as a parent?
Yeah, definitely. There have been so many changes. As a parent, I think that one of the most important things is to make sure you have somebody to talk to. And, that could be a friend, a family member, and then just making sure that you do get a little bit of time for yourself, maybe finding that space to have a minute, maybe while the child's asleep, some kind of hobby, reading a book. And additionally, for those coping strategies, we're teaching the kids, but really we all need them. Coping strategies, I think, for all of us. Maybe reading a book, watching television to kind of shut off your mind, kind of finding what helps you cope, because that's going to be different for your child. But it's great if you can model that coping and that you can sort of take that on yourself and make sure you're calm before going to help your child with their own coping. So definitely sort of self-managing is really helpful, and having those coping strategies. I would say a lot of parents who talk with us say, I'm really stressed because this change is hard for me. And, taking it one day at a time, knowing that change will affect a child, and that eventually this will pass. A lot of times as a parent, we've gone through phases with my child where, I was thinking, oh gosh, if this goes on forever, I think I'm going to have a hard time. And then a month later, that phase is gone. That behavior isn't occurring anymore. And so just keeping in mind that so many things are temporary, and we're going to work through them. And that just knowing that most things are not this permanent problem. If we work on them, we can make them better.
Well, that's fantastic advice. And I hope everyone enjoyed everything that you had to share with us today. We're so grateful for your time and your knowledge. As a reminder, we will be sending out a recording of this webinar, as well as some resources and Lindsey's contact details. So if you do have any questions, feel free to follow up with her. But I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Stay safe, and happy Halloween. Thank you, Lindsey. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.